Welcome to the Western Bell podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Waking to Ordinary Life. The talk was given by Lalitha on June 22nd, 2024 via Zoom. Lalitha is a spiritual teacher with an ashram in British Columbia, Canada, who was empowered by her master, Lee Lozowick, in 1998. Her books include Waking to Ordinary Life and Cultivating Spiritual Maturity. In this talk, Lalitha states that waking to ordinary life is about cultivating a vulnerability to beauty. When we are stagnant and fearful, interested in a safe comfort zone, we don't notice the beauty in ordinary life. But we can broaden our view, and if we take a closer look at ordinary life and lean into it, she says that beauty explodes on us. Lalitha addresses issues relevant to those on a spiritual path, including questions from those in attendance, in surprising, grounded, uncompromising, spontaneous ways. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Lalitha.
Waking to Ordinary Life. There's actually a trilogy, Waking to Ordinary Life, and then Cultivating Spiritual Maturity, and Prayers and Presence is the third one. And it's about particular prayers and particular practices that we do in my specific school in my lineage. So some of my students also wrote up stories about how they use these things. And it is a lot about ordinary life. How do we actually use our practices? And there's so much written about this. Chant a mantra, sing a holy name, pray to some deity hoping for a favor to help you out. You're having trouble in your ordinary life. But, really, when it comes down to it, who you are in the moment of decision making, that's ordinary life. And sometimes we discover that we're so confused and so afraid of ordinary life that we don't make clear decisions. We don't make healthy decisions at a moment's notice. We make frightened, confused, probably manipulated by others decisions about stuff. And since my background, since a child was as a healer of various types, I still serve that function in a different way. And I still get crisis calls. Now it's emails. We never had email, so the crisis calls was either phone or somebody would come over to our houses. But as long as we have a body, ordinary life is going to present to our different egos stuff that we consider to be a problem. And that's often what really throws us off of our seat. I'm assuming if we're coming to a talk like this, you have some interest in spiritual practice. So I'm just going to speak from that assumption that I'm speaking to practitioners, people who actually have a little more discipline than the average. So one of the common things over this past year was crisis about all kinds of decisions we might have to make with our money, with our medical care, with our politics, and who we're going to vote for and who we're going to donate money to, all the stuff of ordinary life. And it becomes so overblown and so big that we become exhausted before we even get to the part about, do we have a work eye inside? Do we have some kind of mature decision-making capacity? We never get that far because in ordinary life, we're usually thrown off our seat pretty quickly. And one of the assumptions that I often hear is that if we're not handling ordinary life very well, it's probably the fault of our mother or our father or their mothers and fathers or some ancestors or somebody or something in our past. And so it's not our fault. Or look what so-and-so taught us, or look at the crisis we had, or we were adopted, we weren't nursed, whatever it is. We never get to the part where we have to actually stand up and say, I am here. I am here. And look at the moment of the ordinary life and make a clear decision. Now, I know some of the people I see here today, I know a little bit about some of you. more than one has had somebody pass away recently. Some of you have lost jobs. Some of you have had crisis in your parents. And these things have to be handled. But when I wrote that book, Waking to Ordinary Life, it was implying that we're not always awake in ordinary life. We are stumbling through ordinary life. And sometimes that's all we're interested in. So we just find a comfort zone. We find out how we can feel safe. And we just agree with anybody around us about everything so we feel okay. So that might be where we start from. But when I wrote that, it was about really broadening our view. In those days, I had a guru, and he was always kicking our ass and teaching us stuff, and his guru was always teaching. So all of those teachings passing down was always saying over and over variations on wake up, wake up, wake up. And it sounded like a great idea. But when you put it into practice, what takes it from an idea to waking to ordinary life? And this is the beauty of it. What I like to suggest to people is this idea of creating beauty, surrounding ourselves with beauty, not just physical beauty, but beauty of the eyes, the heart, the mind. This is something I get asked all the time. How can we sustain joy? How can we have joy longer, better in this ordinary life? We wake to ordinary life and it's a mess. What I would suggest is that waking to ordinary life is actually waking to and cultivating a vulnerability to beauty. So this idea of becoming vulnerable to beauty, not just making up stuff, getting pictures, statues, having more boyfriends, girlfriends, but the beauty of being is part of waking to ordinary life. So when I was writing that book, I was naming the chapters after stuff that was coming up in these phone calls and visits that we'd get. What were the problems of the time? So we were trying to come up with names for that book. And I was talking to Lee Lozowick is my guru. I was talking to him about it, and I was saying, no, we've got all these ideas for this title of this book, and it's all about this practical stuff. People's crisis. When do I get a vacation? When will I find my forever love? When can I get more money? How can I pay my debt? So I'm saying to Lee, we got to come up with a name, and here's some chapters, and I had a list of names, and I even had some samples of pictures for the front. I hand him this pile of stuff. I say, here's some names, here's some pictures. What do you think? And so he chose that name. He said, I want you to call it Waking to Ordinary Life, he said, because most often we become stagnant. The regular person, we're all that regular person when we're in that mood. In our ordinary mind, we become stagnant, fearful, stuck. And we don't even notice ordinary life, he said. So we're waking up to the beauty, the potential of just being alive. And he said, so I want to have that word in there. So we're going to do Waking to Ordinary Life. So, okay, fine. We'll call it that. And he chose the cover, which was this potted plant in a window of a cottage. And I'm thinking, out of all the choices for the cover of that book, he said, that's ordinary life. You've got a rickety cabin, you've got a window with a windowsill, you put a beautiful geranium on there and water it every day and sustain a piece of beauty. So we had this figured out. We've got this book come out, and someone says to me in front of him that my suggestions for ordinary life were too scary, and that maybe I was a little too blunt in that book and that it was a little bit too scary. And they wanted it to be smoothed out. They said they wanted to smooth it. They thought it needed a little more editing, a little more smoothing, because my style was a bit rough and maybe a little bit too blunt. And so Lee started yelling. I remember this. He was yelling. The person was in the room, but he was just yelling, warning me, he said, to never censor. He says, them. He had this big them. He says, don't let them do this. Don't let them censor you. Don't soften the thing. This is what it's about. And he's slapping his hand and he's yelling about, don't allow any compromise. And even though it was triggered by the topic of this Waking to Ordinary Life, he was really making a statement with his influence and his intensity about no compromise is what it takes to wake to ordinary life. And we have to be interested in that. The first step is personal necessity. We have to be interested enough to even want to face the difficulty of being awake ever, but waking to ordinary life. So the roots of that book, before it ever even got printed, he said, do you want this book to be a hardcover? It'll have to be more expensive. He said, do you want it to be a hardcover or do you want it to be a paperback? And I said, well, mostly I know poor people. I said, we should have it be paperback. I said, if it's paperback, it'll be cheaper, we can print more, and it'll be really accessible. And he started to laugh, and he said, that's it, that's exactly right. He said, no hardcovers around here, or something like that. He was laughing about it. So every step of the way, he kept coming back to the radiance of that beauty of waking to ordinary life, the beauty of that, no compromise. It was very intense and sweet the way he would laugh and tease about it. But it also made a strong point, this thing about not compromising. And that doesn't mean to be rigid. But in any case, this idea of no compromise has to also touches on the topic of where have we become stagnant? Nobody likes the word stagnant. That's why it's a good word, because it sounds like something's rotten. Here in Canada, if I think stagnant, I think of our pond that might be full of mosquitoes today and rotting wood from the tree that fell down or something. So stagnant pond with gunk in it. But on the other hand, a stagnant pond, if any of you took science class in school, is full of life that you can't see. It's full of life of all kinds. And the reason we call it stagnant is we don't see the beauty. We don't see the life in the stagnant pool. So waking to ordinary life, another cartoon image of that is looking closer, looking much closer to ordinary life. And then the beauty explodes on us. And I remember when I first looked through a microscope at a stagnant pond, and the beauty just exploded on me, the tiny, amazing things that were alive in there. And later, when I became a more serious practitioner, I was stunned how these things applied to ordinary life, leaning into the crisis, looking at it closely. And this is something that is very hard to do, because in ordinary life, difficult things happen every day. And our tendency is to shrink away, to step back, to wish we could go back to bed, cover our head, or we wish that it didn't happen to us or something. So I have this dear friend who's currently been told he's got a few weeks to live. His cancer has become very aggressive, they tell him. And he's kind of a backdoor devotee of Mayor Baba, this guy. So I get an email from him, and he has a long history of just being a homeless guy. He was a computer programmer, then he became homeless, lived on the streets for years, was a rowdy adventurer for years and years, eats whatever, whenever he can. And now he's come to a part of his life where now he's dealing with cancer, but he's had enough insight that he says to me, well, this is my life. This is my ordinary life. And this is the crisis of it. But he wrote to me, he said, the pain is getting to the point where my doctor has doubled my morphine dose. But he said, the beauty, he said, it's not just that I'm hallucinating on morphine. He said, before I got more morphine for the pain, I was discovering more beauty because I was leaning into it and looking closely. And he said, there's moments where the beauty of ordinary life explodes upon me. This is part of this mystery of waking to ordinary life instead of just tolerating ordinary life or becoming stagnant in our little pool. Jerry Pramick, Regina's husband, he was another example, and it was very uncanny because Jerry said the exact same thing to me. He said, well, I'm dying, he says, but it's okay. That's how he talked about it. Someone was giving him a massage and saying, is this okay? Can I massage you this way or that way? And Jerry said, well, there's always a lot of pain, he said, but there's so much joy. There's so much joy. That's an example of a practitioner who was awake in ordinary life. So much pain and so much joy. This is something I think that takes necessity. We really have to have something that catapults us into being interested in such a thing. Otherwise, ordinary life is just surviving. We just survive and we're afraid all the time. All the time. It breaks my heart to hear it. I don't even like to hear myself be afraid. Never mind everybody else who might call me up or write to me about their difficulty. But really, we're so frightened by ordinary life because we have not yet created a deep vulnerability to the beauty that's hidden in that stagnant pond. It's an extraordinary secret that bursts upon us when we have necessity. So it's a curious juxtaposition of, yes, we have to do our daily life stuff, but hidden in there. And I really mean hidden. I mean, so many of us, we have been practicing for years. We read every spiritual book. We've done every kind of thing. One time, we were living on an ashram with our guru. We added up on paper every practice that we ever heard of that Lee suggested, because we thought, well, maybe we should do them all. So we wrote down every practice. We were going to do every practice and really get enlightened quick. And so we made a list of every practice that had been suggested. And we discovered that it was not a doorway to enlightenment. It was a path to exhaustion. There wasn't even enough time in the day to do everything that we thought good practitioners would do. And so in our ordinary lives, whether we're on an ashram or in our town, in our apartments, our habit is to become so overwhelmed with everything we should do to keep ourselves from being deeply frightened. We have no breath, literally, we have no breath for beauty. I'm telling you the secret right up front here. Every breath for beauty. It's extraordinary, this waking to ordinary life, the potential of that, because we all have ordinary life. If anything comes to anyone's mind as I'm talking off the top of my head here, some of you might have a specific situation in your sadhana or a very particular example in your ordinary life. We could speak to specifics because it would be more useful to people that have come to this talk tonight instead of just more platitudes and ideas of wisdom that we have not yet actually woken up enough to actually find the beauty there. It might be why so many great realizers call spiritual work, they say it's a mystery path. That used to really piss me off because mystery path sounds good until you figure out you don't even know what that means. And when we would talk about ordinary life, everyone thinks we know what ordinary life is. Every single individual, if you ask them, do you know what ordinary life is? Every individual would make their personal mental list of how busy they are. There is this tendency in ordinary life to have a busyness contest. I'm busier than you. Look how much stuff I've done. Look how much stuff I'm going to do. Look at all these plans that are unfulfilled yet, and I've got to do them. So we become very, very busy, even more and more busy. Waking to ordinary life is impossible when you're stirring up the gunk so much. I couldn't see the beauty of the stagnant pond if I was stirring it all up. I had to stop, let the water calm down, take a few drops, and lean in. And I discovered a lot of stuff that way. It's kind of cool to be able to imagine what would it be like if we were not part of the busyness contest in our ordinary lives and what we think is our ordinary life. Every single person I've asked ever, what do you think ordinary life is? They just tell me about their day. It's rare to have somebody say, wow, I looked closely at a drop of water. Nobody has ever said that. We usually step away because we're already exhausted with our fear. We're already exhausted with fear, with confusion. So waking to ordinary life is the breath of fresh air that comes when we have nurtured. This is the literal thing. I'm not trying to be esoteric. When we have nurtured the vulnerability to beauty in all of its forms, Then there is enduring joy. That enduring joy does not depend on how busy, how important, how unimportant, how many crises, how much pain, are we sick, are we not sick? Enduring joy is there. And I can tell you that it's there, but how would you discover it for yourself? That's the tricky bit. That's the real tricky bit. So does anyone that's come here today to this talk, does anyone have something that you'd like to talk about or mention in your personal sadhana that might make this information more usable?
Yes. If somebody asks me what I got from waking to ordinary life, it was clean your bathroom. When your life is falling apart, create a space of order, cleanliness, and then you can merge into something with beauty. And I think it's such grounded advice. You know, I've been able to create within my room a place of sanctuary, and it's because I've really committed to keeping it beautiful and clean. So it's so necessary to build my life by practice in. That was from your book.
Yeah. People don't think I'm a very spiritual person when I say clean your bathroom. They think, well, my mom told me that or something. Here's a secret for many of you. Waking to ordinary life means that you understand, as an example, in the West, especially, but anywhere, you begin to understand that every space that you cultivate, including your bathroom, is, we call it a chamber. It can be an empowered space that nurtures a particular nuance of this elusive juice of transformation that we all read about. It has a lot to do with cleansing the mind. And so we spend a lot of time, everyone goes in our bathroom, hopefully at least once a day or so, hopefully. After this talk, you should go and look and see what condition is your bathroom in. Do you have bottles of stuff on the counter? I went to one of my students' houses one time and I said, let's go check your bathroom. I started to do this and then they started getting the hang of it and cleaning up before I would get there. But the state of your bathroom is the state of your mind, literally, because it's a cleansing chamber. And when we become stagnant and we are not noticing these details, we don't even remember it's supposed to be a cleansing chamber. We have literally stuff shit all over the place. We have our bottles and jars and hairbrushes and toothbrushes and the toothpaste, and then there's mold around the bathtub or whatever, or behind the toilet or something. So I go to my student's house. I said, let's see what state your mind's in. We go in her bathroom, and every square inch of reachable wall was covered with hooks for earrings and jewelry as high up as I could reach, and she was taller than me. And on the counter around the sink were 3 different kinds of hairbrushes. It was like a cartoon. And so I remember it vividly. There were 3 different kinds of hairbrushes, different hairsprays, makeup. I mean, it was a lot of stuff covering every surface. And I said, what do you think this would indicate about your mental state, your emotional state? And she got it right away because she was pretty sharp. And she was somebody who was always suffering from profound clutter in her thinking. She was unfocused. She was brain fog. She was confused, emotionally hyperactive all the time. She didn't believe me at first. She said, wow. And I said, yeah. I said, just try. I said, this would be too big to clean this whole thing. I said, what about clean that half over there or clean that one corner? She started to actually practice with the idea of creating a cleansing chamber so that when you step into that chamber, your ordinary life itself is digested. This sounds too good to be true. Who wouldn't want one of these things? You'd probably pay the big bucks, but you could have a cleansing chamber. So she started to do this, and it was extraordinary. Any effort to organize her mind. And I said, in the worst case, you get a clean bathroom, even if it doesn't work. But I used to teach homeschool for the children on the ashram. And then when they got to a certain age, they all could decide what school they wanted to go to. And they all wanted to go to the public schools and high school and stuff, so fine. But when they were little, we'd have homeschooling. And I was trying to teach them to work with being really focused and working with ordinary life in a focused way. And they were just little kids. We're talking like 6, 7, 8 years old. So we had this game. And the game was, now that I'm thinking about this, it was probably horrify the moms, but the game was that we would go into the men's bathroom, because I knew it was messier than the women's ones. The game was we would see how many places needed to be cleaned that no one would think of. And so we would go in there and we would look minutely in every corner and behind the toilet, and they'd peer down the drain with their flashlights. We would look in every nook and cranny. We'd make a list of how the bathroom needed to be cleaned. Somehow we convinced a couple of the guys to follow the list. And then we were going to come back and check. So the game was like a mystery hunt. The reason the kids liked it was because it was messy and it was gritty and it was the forbidden space of the men's bathroom. And we were looking in the corners and we were going around behind the toilet. So you might think this story has nothing to do with ordinary life. This is how stagnant we become. We don't even notice until we have necessity. So these guys thought, oh, well, 7, 8-year-olds, what do they know about cleaning anything? So they follow the list, they clean up, they come back and they say, okay, we've cleaned the bathroom. So it was a group of about 5 kids. I said, so let's go check. Oh, yeah, they all work. So, yeah, let's go check. So we go to check. And I said, now, what do you think they wouldn't know to clean? What do you think they missed? And every kid had an idea of where the adults would not look to clean the bathroom. And you can apply this. We don't even know where to look in ordinary life. We don't even know what little clutters are there that constantly are polluting our work chamber, our practice chamber, our spiritual chambers, the elements of waking up to ordinary life. This is a true story. So we go back in the bathroom and we're going to try to find where the adults either did not follow the list or skimmed over or didn't notice or something. And those little kids, they were ruthless. Who would ever look these places? They open the cover under the sink. They have these water knobs to turn the water on and off for the sink. If you have an emergency, you can turn the water off. So they had flashlights. They looked behind the faucet knobs on the plumbing under the sink in the cabinet, in the dark places. And we would go back to class and discuss this. I said, what made you think to look there? And they said, well, Lee, you're always talking about look in the dark. Actually, later, when these kids became teenagers, they would still call me up, or if they were nearby, they'd come over. And in their own ordinary lives, when we would get into these discussions, they always were thinking up extraordinary places that no one would even think to look. Most kids wouldn't even want to look inside themselves in their own hidden corners. And they would point out to each other and discuss these things. Have you asked your mom about this? And what about that? It actually played out as they matured. But as little kids, it was simply a game of discovery. And I picked that particular, could have been any room, but the living room, for example, was way too tame. You have to have something edgy. You have to have a little bit of risk involved. And so for them, 7 and 8, it was a little bit risky to go into the men's bathroom and look in the corners. We can do this in our own ordinary life. And we can call it whatever we want. And later on, when I was teaching other people, I would call it decluttering. But first you have to notice in our ordinary life all the piles of clutter. And we can't always just blame it on our ancestors. We need to stand up and say, I am here. I will work. I will look in the dark places. I'm going to shine a light there. I will nurture beauty. I will rest in beauty. I will be awake in ordinary life. And that takes necessity. That takes real necessity. It's far easier to say, I think I'll sleep in today.
Lalitha, what comes up for me about this topic, waking to ordinary life, is relating to people I don't know who I just come across during the day with no goal, for no reason other than we've crossed paths today. Mm-hmm. I was coming down on the shuttle to the airport a couple of days ago, and the driver of the shuttle started engaging just a very mechanical conversation with me, but it deepened. And over the course of an hour and a half, she had told me her whole life story. And we had really had some exchange that enriched my life in some way. And I'm sure it enriched hers too. And that was it. We got off and I gave her a tip and said, just this little slice of life was really wonderful.
Yeah.
I'll never see that person again. That's just a very ordinary experience. Anyway, that's one thing that occurs to me as you're speaking.
Yeah. I had a young student. She was probably 20, maybe. She lived in Vancouver and she would take the bus everywhere. So she's on the bus and somebody on a bicycle came out quickly in front of the bus. The bus hits the person. She's on the bus. Bus slams on the brakes, hits the person on the bicycle. Person is bloody and knocked off the bike, lands on the ground. The bus is stopped. People are crowding around. And my friend jumps off the bus. And she's just a young woman, but she was part of our community of practitioners. So she had a couple ideas. And we had just had this talk about if you come upon somebody who's dying, you could whisper something helpful in their ear, maybe, if you had anything smart to say. So she jumps off the bus and everybody was backing away from the now smashed bicycle rider on the street. Most of the people were backing away on their phones or taking a picture, and she leaned into it. This is waking to ordinary life. So she leaned in, and it's not just about rescuing somebody and being a good Samaritan. She was remembering herself enough in that moment. She rushed forward, leaned down by this guy, and this is a young woman who was very fussy and did not like to get her fingernails dirty at all. She was a very fastidious type of a personality. And here she is on her knees on the streets of Vancouver, flattened bicycle rider, bloody on the street. She thought for sure the person was dying. And she leans over and she whispered something kind in their ear. She told me what it was at the time. It was some advice she had read or that we had talked about, like angels were coming or something nice that she thought up in the moment. And everyone else had stepped away. In fact, she later learns that the person did die. She'll never see them again. The only connection was they died in front of her. She gets off the bus. Everybody else stays on the bus. She jumps off the bus and runs forward. This is happening all the time. Could we lean in? And this is kind of an advertisement because I wrote about leaning in this book, Waking to Ordinary Life. Way later on, I think chapter 8 or something. You can lean in to somebody being crushed on the bicycle in front of you. Instead of saying, blood, I can't, we could say, I didn't plan on this. And then you jump off the bus and you run forward. That was an extraordinary thing that young woman did. But in any case, this is an example. We lean into. So these circumstances happen in ordinary life all the time. So this is all very risky stuff. That's why most people don't want to be waking to ordinary life.
Over the last few years, I've been mitigating crisis after crisis, and the solution becomes another problem area. And I've been going on telling myself that I need more stability in my life before I make progress in the work. And this is something I am noticing. I keep telling myself, I tell myself I'm too exhausted emotionally, physically, financially. It's just been this constant uphill struggle to find the stillness amidst the chaos. I'm actually, as I'm listening to you, I'm reframing this perspective that this is life happening to me to this is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity for life presenting me necessity. It's almost like a koan. It's like there's a sense of urgency to find that stillness within the midst of this upheaval. The plan is always shifting in my life. So I've lived in about half a dozen places since the beginning of the year. And over the last hour, I've been forming this intention to simply be present with the circumstances of life and simply be this witness to it instead of making it my all-encompassing mission to find stability and then resume the work once I find the greener grass on the other side.
I have some questions if you were interested in me giving you some questions.
Yes.
Okay. So first question is, do you consider yourself as someone who has a disciplined spiritual practice of some kind?
No.
Okay.
Although with a caveat, if I may, I have a pretty disciplined attitude, but it's that perception of the stagnancy that I'm abiding in that I feel is holding me back from really engaging with that discipline.
And so what would you say is your go-to when you need comfort? Is it a substance you go to, or is it an activity that you go to? What is your comfort tool?
I watch comedy. That's something that fills me with some joy and ease.
That's a great one. Comedy is great. You know, a lot of people don't understand that comedy affects the actual literal chemical molecules in the neurons, in the brain synapses, in your head. So it's a great tool to refresh your physical brain stuff. And anything that's going to refresh your physical brain stuff is going to refresh your subtle psychic brain stuff. So comedy is a great example. So that sounds pretty harmless. I live in British Columbia. Lots of people around here, their go-to comfort is just to stay stoned all the time because it's legal. And that doesn't have much of a profitable outcome. But here's something that I noticed when you were speaking, and it's not an uncommon way of defining things, but I think we could maybe move the bar on this a little bit. You were speaking about finding stillness within the chaos. And another way I would reinterpret that would be to find some kind of peace in the middle of chaos, or some kind of, you use the word stability. So it's normal. This is not a criticism. It's normal to think that there is no stability in chaos, so that we have to go get some stability somewhere, and chaos is not it. So sometimes we're using our language to separate our moods into categories. I'm not having peace because I'm having chaos. I'm not having stability because I'm having this contentious relationship. That makes me feel unstable, what I'm calling unstable. So we have these words that we use in order to try to discuss with ourselves the stuff that feels good and the stuff that does not feel good. Peace sounds pretty good. Stability sounds good. Chaos, that sounds like near-death scenario. And we have it separated out. I often hear this language. We all do this. We would like to find some peace somewhere or some stability somewhere. And to make it a cartoon, what if there was a little guardian angel or somebody flying around in the air that knows the answer to everything, and they wrote you a note, and the note says, chaos is actually the most peaceful of all. In this cartoon, the angel always knows all the smartest, true stuff, and so you can depend on the note. So you get this note, and the note says, somebody told you that stability and peace and quiet was somewhere else, and it wasn't in the chaos, but I'm your helpful little angel, and I'm sending you this note to tell you the secret that chaos is the most stable of all. You can rely on it. It's always there. It never goes away. And it's non-negotiable, rock bottom, steady. I mean, that's a complete game changer. If there was a God floating around in the sky writing personal notes, and we knew this, and we got a note like that, and they said, you should have as much chaos as possible. Get more chaos. That's the most stable thing you can possibly have, and it will bring you such joy. Who would ever think that way? But there is a weird point of view, which I often have. That's why I'm passing this on to you. It's weird, it's strange, but there is some wisdom in it. We don't have to go somewhere else or be somebody else or do something else. It's like the department store. We don't have to go to a different department to get the peace, and then to another department we're going to get the chaos. There is a view in which that is very stable. Does that work? It works because of the heart of compassion. And I think that maybe you have some of this compassion because you like comedy. I think that you've got a piece of this mystery already. You suspect, oh, I'm in chaos. A little comedy won't hurt. That's how you nourish your brain. So fine. But the more we embrace and wake up to ordinary life, it doesn't have to be messy. Someone said to me, oh, it's terrible advice, Lalitha, because you're just saying that we should be miserable and be fine with it. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we should just be miserable as possible and just pretend like it's all okay. I'm suggesting that we don't have to go anywhere else or be anywhere else. I am assuming that even though he's saying he doesn't have a defined spiritual practice, that he watches comedy. He has some discipline. He has something that he can go to that's basically pretty healthy. He's at least keeping his wits about him. You have to know what's funny in order to laugh at something. So that's better than being zoned out and just opting for stagnation. Anyway, what if? I often think in terms of this when I'm solving difficulties that come my way with people, because our definitions often get in our way. And a common definition is that chaos has no redeeming qualities. And all the redeeming qualities are in the nicer words like peace, love, stability, etc. It's worth shaking up our dearly held belief a little bit.
I see the way that if I'm seeking stability, it subtly implies that I don't have the thing I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe not so subtly implies that, but there's a subtle aspect to that, which is the naming of that separates me from my ability to respond in some way. And it's not that I don't completely have a practice. I belong to a Sufi tariqa, and part of our practice is self-observation, self-remembering, or kappa, and self-witnessing. But it's just that the practice I have is so often disrupted from totally involving myself with it.
It seemed to me that you were implying with something that you said in your interaction with certain people that it wasn't very satisfying, that maybe it was disturbing or maybe it was chaotic or not to your liking in some way. A lot of times we often feel like we're not stable because of, and then we have a list of stuff. And so a really good practice while you're very busy being in chaos, you could, 3 seconds, you could say, I am stable. You know, you're in the middle of your daily chaos. You could say, wow, look at all this stability. Even though it's a complete lie, you don't like it, you're in the middle of chaos. Call it stability just for the hell of it. You've got plenty of it. Just say, wow, this chaos is really stable. I got a lot of stability here. And, you know, that's comedy. And then you get your sense of humor back, you know.
What that brings out for me is taking myself out of this one particular I that I'm operating from and taking a God's eye view of the organization on a larger scale that we puny little humans look at like the chaos and the maelstrom, but it is all part of an order. And I can get myself out of my own wheel spinning, reframing it.
So these are tools that we can use. But when you're in the midst of the daily difficult chaos, I'm not suggesting that it's so easy and why don't we just think of some of these mantras or some of these ideas and it's all going to be good. We still have to handle the smashed, bloody bike rider laying on the street. Action still needs to be taken because we're alive, we're in and through the body, real time, ordinary life. We still have to handle it, and it is messy, and it's really deeply frightening, and it's exhausting, all of those things. And I don't think that's going to disappear just because we have some smart ideas of what to do about it. But I was really happy to hear that you like comedy, because that is one of the quickest, most potent brain nurturing chemistries there is. So what if you were a chaos comedian and that's your new persona? Get yourself a hat that personifies that. So we're in the middle of chaos. You whip out your hat and put it on. You could keep it in your pocket. And then when things get really messy every day, you put it on. It's like Superman outfit, Okay, anybody else? Something that you dare to say? Okay.
I have a spiritual practice and it's a struggle. Maybe the breakthroughs are just very subtle, and nothing is really profound.
What would be a sign of something being profound? What would be the attributes of it? Or like, how would you know if something's profound?
I think maybe if I could hold attention longer than 5 seconds, 7 seconds, like in meditation, if I could hold my attention on my breathing for 30 seconds, I would say, wow, that's pretty profound, because it takes practice and discipline, and not many people can do that.
I know how to focus your attention easily for 30 seconds or a minute. No problem. But I think you have a very particular idea of where your attention should be focused in order for it to count in the profound department. Or could it be anything?
No, I would say in meditation, if I was to hold that attention on my breath longer, I would say that would be an achievement, or I'm holding attention longer.
So here's an idea. I got lots of ideas, so if you don't like them, you just throw them away. When I was a young healing apprentice, my healing teacher had 12 children, and 8 of them still lived at home. And my job was taking care of all these kids. And we lived in a big house, but there was no bedroom for me. So my room was the attic. My so-called room was the attic. And that's where I would sit to meditate at night after everything was all calmed down and all the healing stuff got done. And I would sit there and try to be calm and focus my attention. And my healing teacher would come up to the attic sometimes, and we would discuss this a little bit. And she taught me this thing, which even decades later, I tried it out on lots of people. It still works. So you can focus your attention on your breath. Now, this is a literal thing. This is a simple, literal thing. You get the hottest cayenne you can find. So if you go to the herb store, cayenne comes in different hotnesses. You can get the paprika, which is nothing. You can get 50,000 BTUs. You can get 90,000. And there's some cayennes that are 120,000. We used to use the 120,000 cayenne peppers for healing purposes. So we were hardcore. We just threw it in water. But later I was more fancy. I put it in tomato juice or something. Anyhow, you hold in your mouth for like a second. You get this big dose of cayenne. And the properties of cayenne is it stimulates the blood and the breath in the upper half of the body. And no one can think of anything but their breath for at least a minute if you do that. And then the next thing is you have to treat your body a little bit like you have a pet dog. You have to get your body to know that it could do something for a minute. And your attention will be on your breath, and it will be expanded. It's temporary, but all this blood rushes to your brain. New chemistry shoots around up there. Your eyeballs bug out. You can't catch your breath, and you are riveted.
So do you think I could then do it without the cayenne pepper?
That's the whole point. If you had to do that your whole life, your poops would be so hot you would never get off the toilet.
No, I'm
so
asking.
you don't want to do that. So you want to do this. This is not a lifestyle. You want to give your physical pet an example of how easy it is to be entirely focused. The beauty of this is that it is not rational. I think you're pretty rational. This is irrational. It's illogical. Pay attention. You really can watch and say, okay, eyes bugging out, eyes watering, nose watering. You are focused, and pay attention to how your body feels. and how your head feels. This is an animal sensation. It's the survival instinct, and it will be riveted. This is not enlightenment, but this is like training your dog, so to speak. So there's a few little things that yogic practitioners, these guys you read about, these India guys, they're in the cave. You think they're sitting around doing nothing all day. No, they did a lot of work with the plants and the animals and different rocks. I've studied all this stuff and I've tried a whole lot of it. Some of it is probably not worth repeating, but some of it, there's some wisdom in starting with the most basic training, not intellectually thinking, what's my next meditation practice? All you want to do is give your body, mind, the sensation of being entirely focused. Now, sometimes in some of these old books, you don't have to do it this way, but some of the old yoga masters, they would do stuff like smash your fingernail and blood spurts out, and then, or they'd break your arm or throw you off a cliff or something, but you don't have to. Just get some 120,000 cayenne and take a big drink. And you don't have to jump off the cliff or smash your finger or stub your toe or anything.
I'd rather take the cayenne pepper.
Yeah. Some people think I'm just being silly, but there's wisdom in this silliness. It actually has a point. You'll know if you're overdoing it if you get a stomach ache or something. If you're nervous, you could start with a pinch of cayenne and a little water, and you could build up. Heat units is how they measure cayenne. On the label, it'll say 120,000 HU. That means heat units. Get dry cayenne. Do not get raw peppers.
Okay.
That will burn the mucous membranes of your mouth and your throat. You want dry cayenne pepper. Yeah.
Right.
But there's a question, Lali, that someone had been wanting to ask. Sounds like they would rather not ask themselves, but they asked if I would ask it.
Okay. Yeah. An anonymous person.
Realizing you, Lalitha, are Canadian, but how much do you engage in politics? Myself, I steer away from active engagement in national politics for fear of reprisal.
Okay. So I'm actually American. I was born in Michigan. I grew up in Arizona. I immigrated to Canada, so I'm actually a dual citizen. And I actually am very curious and interested in not just politics and politicians, but the politics of mind, which shows up in politics, it shows up in medicine, it shows up in wokeness, it shows up in all kinds of stuff. No, I skim the headlines. I don't read everybody's opinions and stuff, but I want to be a little bit aware of what's going on from the point of view of the way the mind stuff is moving. I was trained even as a very young child as a healer. I was always watching this. And so now we can say, oh, well, we've got pandemics and medical treatments and we've got politics and we've got wars and we've got people killing each other and, oh, what a mess. Well, I studied really hard to find a time when there was no mess. Because sometimes my parents would say, oh, I wish it was the good old days. So I made it my business to study when were the good old days. And I have to report there's not any. So there is going to be politics and all of this stuff all the time. And I have the luxury to not call a lot of attention to myself. I'm living in the mountains of Canada. But if someone were in the public eye and did not want to attract attention to themselves, well, that's just a matter of either placing or withdrawing our attention. There's a very specific law. Energy follows attention. So the quality of our attention, the direction of our intention, the motives of our attention and our intention, but especially our attention. So if we pay attention to politics and we get all heated up and now we're the pros and the cons and we're for this and against that, well, yeah, you're being eaten. This is a whole nother topic, but this is a way that mind stuff is eaten up by the very influences that are hungry for it. So Tibetans might say a gobbling demon or something. But there are influences of mind stuff that live off of contention. They live off of the disturbance of mind. So if we're someone who gets very disturbed when we take sides, oh, we hear this opinion and we like it. When we hear that opinion and we don't like it. If we know that we are unable to hold our seat, then we probably would be healthier for us to not place our attention there, because we never mind attracting the attention of our neighbors or our family members who don't agree with us. Never mind that attention. That might be messy enough. But always remember, as practitioners, you probably have had some kind of an inkling at some point in your sadhana, in your spiritual practice, where you have discovered that thoughts are things. Thoughts have substance. So it isn't just that, oh, I can't give my opinions because my neighbors won't like it. The way we are captivated and become fearful or contentious or side-taking, we are actually contributing to, I'm making a cartoon over here, the mind fuel. You're actually producing mind stuff that is food for the very influences that are disturbing you in the first place. So this is a much bigger view than just, I can't get along with the neighbors who don't agree with me. There's a much, much bigger thing going on with mind, subtle and physical mind. And as practitioners, maybe we don't have to make a deep study of this forever, but we might stumble onto some of these insights. And it becomes even more important to cleanse the mind. And the easiest thing for that is to have a cleansing chamber, clean up your bathroom, go in there and flush it down the toilet, so to speak. From the point of view of just a trick for ordinary life, you're in politics, you have opinions, you get along with your family, you don't. I have people in my Sangha during the pandemic who were kicked out of their own family's Christmas gatherings because they would not get vaccinated. Certain families had the vaccinated Christmas and the other ones had the unvaccinated Christmas. That's contention. That's politics. That's whatever. So if we are unable to hold our seat, and most of us have difficulty doing that, then I would say withdraw our attention from the politics. But if we can apply some wisdom to simply holding our seat and watching this recipe of humankind, because we are part of that recipe, of course, and we can be awake in ordinary life, we can be awake, then we radiate a different kind of mind stuff. It's like your personal antidote. So then, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's politics or opinions or whatever, because we are not participating in perpetual deep disturbance. That's very hard. That sets the bar really high. So for a lot of us, we look at the company we keep, and maybe we surround ourselves with people and circumstances that if we want the love and the attention, well, we've got to participate in the politics. So we have to make some decisions about these things. And maybe we can withdraw our attention or place our attention more healthfully with more wisdom. And then it's not a question of, is Lali going to be involved in politics? It's a question of, how am I going to serve this compassionate mind stuff? Completely different question for a practitioner. So ordinary mind is, how am I going to get along in these politics? Maybe we have to. But another question is, how does my being serve in this? How can I be awake in this ordinary life and still serve without being part of the poisonous stew? And that sets the bar really high. So I know that that would be asking a lot. The questioner would find wisdom in expanding the question.